Good evening, everyone. My name is Lori Cunningham, and on behalf of the City of Bowie, it is my pleasure to have you join us for our second in our series, Bowie Speaks Community Conversations on Social Justice. Tonight, we have an exciting panel ready to engage in dialogue about social justice and religious organizations. It's my pleasure to introduce Councilmember Harrison and Mayor Pro Tem Boafo, who will bring opening remarks. Mayor Pro Tem Boafo, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lori. To start, let me thank the Community Outreach and Diversity Committees, and once again praise the work being done by religious organizations here in the city of Bowie and the broader Maryland community as well. What an amazing time to have a conversation like this, especially during the Lenten season. And soon our brothers and sisters will join us on a similar journey during Passover and Ramadan. Today's question and discussion, in my opinion, is not whether religious individuals or groups should address social issues. Of course we should, but more so the role that they play individually. Each one of us should take his or her beliefs and values into the public arena and apply them to the important social issues of the day. This is a significant part of our religious lives, especially during this time, unlike any other in our nation's history. We all saw what happened on January 6th, as our temple of democracy was under attack. We all saw what happened that day when protesters went up to the Capitol with anti-Semitic and racist sentiments. It made clear to all of us in this country how fragile our democracy and how essential every citizen's commitment to social justice truly is. So as we move ahead, attempting to restore the soul of America, the security of America, let us think more about how each of you has inspired us and stood firm in addressing the challenges of tomorrow, and how grateful we must be to all of you. So as Mayor Pro Tem of the City Council, it is my hope that each member of our body can be inspired by the confidence and work each of you do. So again, thank you guys for allowing me and Councilwoman Harrison to provide opening remarks. Again, you guys are a figure here in our community, and we look forward to working with you guys throughout the rest of the year and throughout these difficult times.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Boafo. We appreciate your words. And next we will have Councilmember Harrison.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem. Hard to follow that, but I appreciate your remarks and certainly agree. You know, I really love the Bowie Speaks Community Conversations series. They've been so insightful and are certainly a great way to involve the community in interactive and important and timely conversations. So I also want to say thank you to the Community Outreach and Diversity Committees for hosting this much needed discussion for the Bowie community. And certainly thank you to the members of our faith community who keep us strong and certainly empowered to do the right thing. So I look forward to this very engaging discussion, and certainly want to understand and hear how the role of religious organizations and their impact on social justice in the community. Thank you so much.
The next voice we will hear is Joseph Wright. Joseph Wright is a member of our Community Outreach Committee and will be one of the moderators this evening. Joseph?
Joseph, you're muted.
You're muted, Joseph.
My apologies. Thank you for being here. Sorry for the not muting. I want to introduce first the committee members who are going to be on here with me, Mr. Bonaventure and Ms. Tameeka Washington. I'm going to start by introducing each panelist. I'm going to start with Mr. Khalil Shadid, former president and Imam Prayer of the Southern Prince George's Community Islamic Center. He's currently the director of the Faith Matters Islamic Center. He's also a member of the Interfaith Council of Suburban Maryland, also a producer of an award-winning television program called The Scholars Chair. And probably most importantly, he's been married for 35 years and is grandpa to Carissa and Keenan. Good evening, sir. Next, we have Reverend Chris Deacon. He's currently serving the United Parish of Bowie since 2014. He's ordained by the Presbyterian Church for 13 years, and he served several churches in the state of Illinois. Good evening, Chris.
Good evening.
Next, we have Reverend Emily Holladay, pastor, currently the pastor of Village Baptist Church here in Bowie. She's a graduate of the McAfee School of Theology in Atlanta, where she studied Christian and social ethics. She is married to Scott and has a 19-month-old son named Franklin. I hope you're getting some sleep these days. She and her family moved to Bowie in January 2020, and she is originally from Louisville, Kentucky. And lastly, I have Rabbi Steve Weisman, who currently serving as a rabbi and spiritual leader for Temple Soleil, Bowie's only Jewish congregation since summer 2000. He's made significant contributions to the larger Bowie community through his involvement in planning and participation in Bowie Unity Day, the Bowie clergy, and this past summer's gathering at Allen Pond Park calling for social justice. He's also the chairman of the board of the Interfaith Coalition of Bowie, and he's been involved with interfaith dialogue throughout his rabbinate. Good evening, sir. So, this evening we're going to essentially talk about the role of religious organizations in the quest for social justice. And under that will be many layers under this umbrella. What is the exact role of our religious organizations in our community? How are our local churches and organizations leading the conversation in regards to social justice? Is the church still considered an anchor in this movement? And lastly, how can we help bridge the gap in social justice overall? At this time, I'll pass it over to the one and only Mr. Bonaventure to lead the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Joseph Wright. And again, welcome to all our four panelists. The first question is more of a yay or nay with 10 seconds for each person to kind of kick things up. So the first question is, should members of religious organizations apply their beliefs and or values to address social justice issues? And this is more for yeah or nay. So we can start with the rabbi, and each person gets about 10 seconds.
Absolutely, unequivocally, yes.
All right, so we can move to Reverend Chris.
Echo what Steve said. Absolutely, our faith should be lived out in every aspect of our lives, including social justice.
All right, the Honorable Khalil Shadid.
Yes, absolutely. Our faith dictates if you declare there is God, you become involved with the political process.
Okay, and last and definitely not the least, we have I think it's who is the last person, our last panelist, can say the name here. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Reverend Emily Holladay.
Thank you. I would say, again, absolutely. One of the scripture verses that I tend to come back to time and time again is Micah 6:8, which says, "And what does the Lord require of you, O mortal, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" And I think that's a theme that carries throughout scripture and throughout Christian tradition. And so, yes, I believe it's very important for us to be involved in social justice in our communities.
Outstanding. Since we all agree on that, then I can go to Reverend Chris Deacon for the second question. What are some of the challenges that people of faith or religious organizations face in addressing and or promoting social justice? To Reverend Chris Deacon.
Thank you. That is a multifaceted question because there are several answers. The easy answer is that when you take scripture, any canon, it can be interpreted so many different ways. Wherever three or more are gathered, you'll have four interpretations. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the Civil War, people quoted scripture both to support abolition and to support slavery. So you're going to have people that approach the Bible from so many different ways, and they're not always going to agree. And social justice sometimes is at the root of that. Another factor is that over time, social justice has been politicized. And in churches, many churches, the big sin is do not get political. Talk about whatever you want, just don't get political when everything has been politicized. So you try to keep the peace, you try not to upset people, you try not to ruffle feathers, and it becomes very difficult to talk about social justice. This is what Martin Luther King Jr. warned about in his letter from the Birmingham jail when he compared the peace that is the absence of tension versus the peace that is the presence of justice. Too often we don't talk about social justice because we prefer the peace that's the absence of tension instead of the true peace, which is the presence of justice. I think the deeper question and the deeper challenge is how to talk about social justice in a way that feeds everyone. If you talk about social justice too much or too strongly, you will drive those that disagree away and you will never reach them. They'll find a congregation, a church that is like-minded, and they'll never take those baby steps. You have to drink milk before you can eat meat. Instead, I find it's more beneficial to discuss the theological images and the ideas behind social justice.
Right.
Yes, you could talk about immigration, but you could also talk about loving your neighbor and starting there with the theological foundations that lead to immigration reform. Instead of talking about racism or white supremacy, you start with talk about how we're all created in God's image and we're all brothers and sisters in God's image. From a Christian point of view, instead of talking about cash bail or police brutality, you start with the fact that Jesus was imprisoned falsely, sentenced falsely, abused falsely. So the real challenge in discussing social justice in a congregation and a body of faith is doing so in a way where everyone is fed.
All right, so excellent, Reverend Chris. Well, Rabbi Steve Weisman, your name is written all over these questions here. What does your faith teach about social justice and human rights? Rabbi Weisman.
It teaches so much that we could probably spend the rest of the night with me just quoting verses, but I'm not going to do that. Because
Okay.
tonight we gather on a night that is set aside for joyous celebration within the Jewish community. The festival of Purim, a holiday based significantly on the story in the Hebrew Bible's book of Esther. That calendar coincidence, just for the record, is exclusively my fault as a rabbi for not checking my calendars more closely when asked to participate tonight. And so I'm grateful for the chance to harmonize what could easily have been a sour note of conflict and to take what could have been a divisive circumstance and use it as a teaching moment. For non-Jewish readers of the book of Esther, the link between our subject tonight and this text may not seem strange at all. It's my Jewish community that may be challenged to make the connection, in large part because of how the celebration of Purim has evolved over time from the story itself. Indeed, non-Jewish readers will probably be more challenged to connect the book of Esther to how we Jews celebrate Purim than to a message of social justice that we find in it. Simply put, the book of Esther tells the story of a political official, Haman, who, when disrespected by a single individual named Mordecai, who happens to be Jewish, takes his wrath out not on Mordecai alone or directly, but by abusing his power and connection to the king to order the death of the entire Jewish community. This abuse of power in seeking the annihilation of a despised minority is one of the cores of social and racial injustice. Complicating matters in the story is that Mordecai, the focus of Haman's rage, is related to the newly chosen Queen Esther. But Mordecai has counseled her to conceal her Jewish lineage. Clearly, Mordecai is concerned about some underlying tension in the society and existing antipathy towards Jews even before Haman acts. Those of us who have ever felt the need to hide an aspect of our true identity in the public square can relate to this element of the story as a social justice tale even more. But the pinnacle moment of the story is when Mordecai confronts Esther with the details of Haman's decree against the Jews. And it's a classic exercise in the struggle we face individually today in determining whether, when, and how to raise our voices to speak out against hate and injustice.
Right.
Given Esther's dual role in the story, as a member of the targeted group, albeit closeted in that identity, and therefore able to pass without political protection, makes Esther's resolution to speak out without concern for possible retribution against her that much more powerful. There's much more that we could and should discuss along those lines just in the story of Esther, especially things like women's rights, but we have more pressing modern issues to work to get to tonight. However, before we do, there is a tragic historical note which cannot be ignored tonight either, as we discuss racial injustice through a religious lens on this holiday of Purim. Because it was 27 years ago on this date, February 25th, 1994, which happened to be both a Friday and the day of Purim, when an Orthodox Jew named Baruch Goldstein opened fire on Muslim Sabbath worshippers in a mosque located on the site believed to be the biblical burial cave of Machpelah in Hebron.
Mr. Weisman, I apologize. I do want to just interject real quick. We do have quite a few more questions to get to.
I know. I'm almost done.
You're on a roll. I'm with you 100%. I get it. I just want to make sure we can try to open up to everything else.
Absolutely.
And also, I just want to take this moment to remind everyone who's viewing that we have the Q&A area where you can ask some questions and hopefully conjure up more conversation. Again, Mr. Weisman, I apologize. I just want to try to keep things going.
No problem, Joseph. I understand. This is one of the most hotly disputed pieces of real estate between Israelis and Palestinians. And when Goldstein was done that day, 29 worshipers were dead. 125 more were injured. And while I and most Jewish leaders loudly and clearly condemned his actions as the religiously and racially motivated terror attack it was, I cannot tonight deny that part of his inspiration, part of his motivation to attack, came from reading these very words of the book of Esther in temple the night before, and believing the ending chapters assuredly written as parody, with the wholesale killing of Persians by Jews, to be God's command to him. No discussion like the one we are undertaking tonight can ignore this terrible event. I only pray that we survive the same calendric circumstances tonight and tomorrow without a repetition, as we here struggle to learn how to avoid such tragedies in our own country. And to close, if we can find all that in one book, how much more in the entire text?
Yeah, outstanding first round of question and answers from our panelists. Now we're going to go to our poll. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Tameeka, Washington.
Thank you so much. It's time for our first poll, and this is where we want to hear from you. And so we'll ask the tech support folks to put the first poll up, and we want to hear what your thoughts are. So the first poll is, what is your first reaction when you hear the term social justice? I'll give you all a couple of seconds to note your responses in there. And then also, as a reminder, if you have any questions for the faith members, for the clergy, please put it in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. All right, let's close this poll and see what the results are. I don't know if they're up. I cannot. Oh, here we go. All right, so it's mostly positive. That's good. That's good. So for most folks, your first reaction when you hear the term social justice is positive and or somewhat positive, or at least neutral. So that's good. All right, so let's move to our second poll, please. We'll pull that up. And the second poll asked the question, do you think the faith community should be leading social justice efforts? Right? What are your thoughts on that? So we'll give you a few seconds to respond to that one as well. All right, I think that is a good amount of time. So let's see what the results are for this poll. Do you think the faith community should be leading? Yes. Or is the majority of the response? It depends. Also good. That's interesting. So maybe we can have some discussion around that as well. Well, thank you so much for participating in the poll. I will turn it over to Jessica, who is also on the committee, and she will facilitate any questions that we have in the Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will ask them of the clergy members.
So, good evening, everyone. And I have a question for Reverend Holladay. How do you engage members of your church or community that do not support protest or understand the social justice movement? Oof, that's a good question. I think it's about meeting people where they are. And, we have everybody in our church. I mean, we have people who want to be out and be, involved in protests, and people who don't. And I think really social justice does not just mean protests. It's about, meeting the needs of the marginalized and the oppressed. And that doesn't just come through one measure. So it's about meeting people where they are and helping to find avenues of getting involved, all the way from, providing food for the food bank to, to being involved in things like the vigil last summer and that sort of thing. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bonaventure.
All right, welcome to our second round of questions. And this one definitely will go to my Honorable Khalil Shadid. How does faith teach an individual to express their opinion without backlash of religious intolerance in the quest for social justice?
There is a phrase in the Quran that was the advice of God to the best Muslim, which was the Prophet Muhammad, may God's peace be with him. He was asked because there is God, that he is to speak clearly and openly to the public, and not become aggressive, not insist on someone accepting the religion or accepting a particular principle behind the religion, but to teach it honestly and openly. So there was always this need for the religion to go public, but it had to be done with respect for human dignity.
Excellent, thank you, sir. The next question will go to Her Royal Highness, the only female panelist that we have. You are next. Your question is, what can religious organizations offer those that are not of their faith as a guide to promote social justice? And that goes to Reverend Emily Holladay.
Okay, yeah, so this I think is a very rich question. As Christians, of course, we are a religious body that is built upon another religion. So much of our understanding of justice comes directly from the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament, as we tend to call it. So even many of the passages in the New Testament relating to justice are directly pulled from the Hebrew Bible. So we know, or ought to know, what it is like to receive a guide from a religion that is not our own. One line that is often repeated throughout the Hebrew Bible is, "Remember that you were once slaves in the land of Egypt," or "Remember that you were once strangers." This is often said by God as a way of reminding the Israelites of how they are to treat people who are not insiders to the religion. Which makes me wonder if perhaps the best guide we can offer to people who are not of our faith is that of welcome and openness, remembering that we were once strangers, and building a model of hospitality out of that may be the key to seeing those with whom we could partner and those most in need of our service. But it could also allow us to look at how we have perpetrated injustice and redirect our own course. So when we talk about what we can offer to those who are not of our faith, especially if we are talking about people from other faiths, I'm not sure that they need us to provide a guidebook or a checklist. Most other faiths already have a guide of their own, but what we all need is openness and friendship, and to remember that we were too once strangers.
All right, thank you, outstanding. I'm gonna pass the baton to Ms. Tameeka Washington to go to our third poll.
Awesome. All right, so here's your chance to weigh in on our next poll. So we're ready for that poll. How often do you participate in social justice causes through your faith community, through your synagogue, through your church, or through your mosque? So we'll give you a couple of seconds to answer that. Is it all the time, sometimes, not often, or never? I think we're ready to see what the results of the poll are. All right, so sometimes looks like the predominant response, or not often. All right, so that gives us some good insight into what's happening in our faith community. So I'll turn it back over to Jessica, who is looking at the question. There's quite a few questions in the Q&A portion. So Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Tameeka. So this question for Reverend Deacon, one of the questions is, does social justice mean equal justice?
Sure, and that's difficult for me to answer because I'm not sure exactly what is meant by equal justice, but I do think that social justice means equal rights for all, equitable opportunities for all. Social justice at its heart is about equality. So if that's what is meant by equal justice, then I would say yes.
Okay. And then our second question, it says there have been local efforts to change the names of schools, streets, and remove Confederate monuments. Should religious communities be heavily involved in these kinds of efforts? And this question, Mr. Khalil Shadid, if you could answer.
I think that the community of religious people should be deeply involved with how our community goes forward into the future. If that means naming schools or naming streets or taking down statues, we should be deeply involved with that. But I also believe that it's not the job of only religious people. I think a better word to describe that community of people would be reasonable people. And I think that we can go forward with a future that means something to everyone and not just a particular segment of our population.
Thank you so much. And one last question, and this is for Rabbi Weisman. Are there any legislative initiatives that the interfaith community is supporting?
The local interfaith community, not yet.
Okay.
Part of it is we're waiting to see what comes up. Part of it, for me as a rabbi, as a Reform rabbi, I happen to be a Brickner Fellow of the Religious Action Center of our movement. So I know that there are some initiatives coming up on a national level that we're just getting the details of and getting briefed on. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. And that's one of the things I learned last summer and needed to hear, and I think a lot of us need to recognize. There's work we can do now, but the serious work in foundation shifting, it's going to take us time. Do it right.
Thank you. And I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Bonaventure. And just a reminder for everyone listening and viewing us that you guys can definitely put your questions into the Q&A, and we will try our best to make sure that the questions get answered. Thank you so much, Bonaventure.
Thank you, Jessica. This is our third and last round of questions, and the next one goes to Reverend Deacon. It says here that given that faith communities remain highly segregated, what have you done or plan to do to create more diversity and or inclusion?
Absolutely, that's a wonderful question. Again, going back to Martin Luther King Jr., who said Sunday mornings are the most segregated time in our nation. And it's the diversity of Bowie is one reason that drew me to this community and made me want to come. In studying this topic, I found that the greatest single factor common across integrated churches was having a gospel choir. And they said some of these gospel choirs sang incredibly, some of these gospel choirs were terrible, that they couldn't just get it together. But it wasn't the gospel choir that helped to integrate the church, but it was the relationships and the fellowships that were created within that choir. So that's something that we've tried to foster in our church. It's a small church that provides a great opportunity, but opportunity for us to get to know each other, to become brothers and sisters in faith, to reach across political divides, racial divides, socioeconomic divides, and to really get to know each other and enter into genuine relationship and genuine conversation.
Great, thank you. Rabbi Wes Weisman, do you have 15 seconds response to, in addition to what we just heard from Reverend Chris?
Absolutely. The simple process, and it sounds simple, but it's the devil's in the details, is building from a foundation of openness by sending out reaches of true intimacy in terms of how we make the relationships amongst ourselves. Caring enough to get to know each other as individuals, rather than as somebody who can just be another statistic as a member, or somebody who can fill an altar spot in the choir, or whatever it is. To actually care about our members and to be able to know each other as human beings, not just as fellow members of a religious institution.
Fantastic, thank you. Now we go to Mr. Khalil Shadid. What social justice efforts have you conducted in the past, and what was the impact?
My efforts in the community is, of course, getting directly involved with the Interfaith Dialogue, which we've been doing for over 20-some years. That is to inform people that Islam is not the boogeyman, or Muslims are not the boogeyman of the community, and that Muslims ought not, as a commitment of faith, hate Jews or Christians or other people of different religions. This is very important, and we talk about these things day in and day out. The other thing is that we have organizations that are in Maryland that actively involve and deal with social issues in the political realm. There are two very large organizations that are growing very quickly, and we, of course, are donating financially for the growth of these organizations. Social justice is probably one of the most important issues in the Muslim community today.
Excellent, thank you, sir. Last but definitely not the least, the last question in this series will go to Reverend Holladay. How can we individually or collectively get involved in a positive way to address social justice issues through faith communities? And
Thank you. Yes. Oh, yes. Honestly, I really think we just start by doing what we can do and then growing from there. So one of my favorite stories is a colleague of mine who is the principal of Rick's Institute in Monrovia, Liberia. During the Civil War in Liberia, the school had to shut down. And when he got back to Rick's after nearly 10 years, he was overwhelmed by everything that needed to be done in order to get the school back up and running. So he started by mowing the grass, and the grass had grown so tall, but he just started by mowing the grass because that's what he could do. And fast forward 20 years later, and the school is now one of the premier elementary through high school boarding schools in Liberia, with many former students who are making a huge difference in their communities. So what I love about that story and why I share it today, even though we're in America, is that he started by doing what he could do. And then he did a little more and a little more. And even today is making movements in Liberia far beyond probably what he ever imagined. And so I think when we talk about social justice, we often think that we have to jump in the deep end and fix everything right away, or we're not doing enough. But truly, it's about making that first step and then not looking backwards.
Wow, excellent. Well, if you build it, they will come. I'm going to pass it on now to Ms. Jessica for Q&A.
Okay, thank you so much. And so one of the questions that we have is, and this can be for Reverend Deacon. What is the clergy doing now regarding social justice?
I think that's going to vary from congregation to congregation. My congregation is Joint PC USA UCC, so we're doing different things through our denominations. Locally, we're helping out with the food pantry. We're talking about issues during prayer study, during Bible studies. During the election, we did a voter drive through the United Church of Christ, a phone bank. Specifically, I worked with Georgia, where we didn't call asking them to vote a different way, but just help them to get registered to vote and encourage them to vote. On the Peace USA side, we've just, in our presbytery, which is our regional body, we're in the process of instituting anti-racism training for all clergy members. We've done book studies. We're working to educate ourselves so that we can walk before we can run.
Okay. And then we have another question here. It says, how can religious communities address social justice related to communities of people whose beliefs are dynamically opposed to their own? Rabbi Weisman, would you chime in?
I'll try. I think part of the issue was eloquently stated 2,000 years ago by Rabbi Hillel, when he taught, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? So there are times when we need to stand up and defend our right to exist and to believe what we believe and do what we do, because there is nobody else who will do it for us. But there are also times when we must put that aside and work for the common good. It's a miraculous phenomenon that in the history of the development of Judaism, at that time when absolute monotheism, that belief in one God, finally took hold and put aside all the earlier forms, one of the things that came with it was a universalistic worldview. Because if you believe in the existence of only one God, then it's essential to recognize that everybody else's God is your God. And that forces you to see the world universally. So even when there are differences, we have to be able to distinguish the ones that truly are dangerous, the ones that are uninformed, from the ones that have some legitimacy, and the ones that are based in fact, and try and work through those and recognize that you can hold divergent views and still be agreeable people and find common ground.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we have one more question here, where essentially our question, if Reverend Holladay could answer, I'm so sorry here. It says, do you find the lack or a real local newspaper hinders your ability to get across to the community what you are doing to provide social justice?
So I would like to pass this question to either Reverend Chris or Rabbi Steve, because I've not been in the community long enough to be able to make a good judgment call on that.
Okay, so any of you?
I'll take it, Chris. Going back to the time when we did have two local papers, the ability to have relationship with the people who were reporting the news is essential, just as it is in building community, so that they knew when to call upon us, when to expect us to call upon them, and a willingness to work with us and together with us. It also means that when we do things that are worthy of approbation, we're going to be held to it. And I think that's something else that we miss by not having a local paper, is the conscience to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. So yeah, would I love to see more ability for us to communicate amongst ourselves without it having to come from us? It would only help.
Thank you so much for that. And then, so I have so I have a question that's going to be for two of the panelists. The question, and this is for Reverend Holladay or Mr. Shadid, if you could decide who's going to go first. But the question is, as a leader in a religious organization, what is your understanding of Black Lives Matter? Who is or isn't included in the Black Lives Matter movement?
Ms. Holladay.
Well, I can answer this. I think we had Rabbi Steve said he wanted to answer it, but I can give my thoughts. And my understanding of the Black Lives Matter movement is it's about saying that Black lives matter, that to the extent of, that if my life matters, your life matters too. And that that I think everybody is included in that, because there is a gap. There is a gap between, resources, education, healthcare, all kinds of different things for Black people and for white people and other different races as well. And so it's important that we all do the work necessary to help bring equity and equality, and to recognize that there is a community of people out there who has been taught by our community that their lives don't matter as much, and that it's important that they know that their lives matter. And from the very beginning, where God said, I created human beings in my image, and didn't qualify that by color or by gender or by anything.
So I know this question, Rabbi Weisman, I guess, had chosen it. I do apologize for that. Just trying to get, a little bit more information, and because you guys are of different faiths. Mr. Shadid, would you like to answer that question?
Yes, the Black Lives Movement is an important movement in this country, and it is, and to the extent that it persists to stand for justice. As a Muslim, I must support that. However, I don't want to be limited to only that particular movement. There is a Quranic verse that I'll quote for you that speaks directly to this point. It's that, O ye who believe, stand out firmly for God as witnesses up to fair dealing, and let not the hatred of others to you make you swerve to wrong and depart from justice. Be just, that is next to piety, and fear God, for God is well acquainted with all things. Justice is the principle at stake, and it is a principle that supports all of humanity.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we will go ahead and Rabbi Weisman, would you, provide your thoughts on what Black Lives Matter, the movement?
It's a challenge for me as a Jew and a rabbi, because on the one hand, the idea of Black Lives Matter is essential. Reverend Holladay used the same verse I was going to use from the creation in Genesis. Not because we talked about it earlier this afternoon or anything, but because it's that good and that true a text in both of our traditions. The challenge for me as a rabbi in particular is when we move from the ideal of Black Lives Matter to the movement that calls itself that occasionally allows people who forget that fighting for equality for some means fighting for equality for all, and hold more extreme views at the same time, sometimes creates an intersectionalism that puts different groups within the group Black Lives Matter at loggerheads with each other. And all too often it seems that the dividing line there, as good friends as Khalil and I are, is between the Muslim and Jewish communities over what happens in Israel and Palestine. And sometimes that gets so far out of hand that even those of us who are absolute allies of the idea of Black Lives Matter, whose worldview aligns perfectly with their goals and direction, are placed into those difficult situations we talked about before of not being able to give full support because we're feeling put upon by the movement itself. And it doesn't help anybody when that happens. And I don't want it to sound like that only is the fault of those within the movement. Because honestly, as I said in my answer earlier, sometimes we've got to recognize that our position is a little bit better off than the people who are fighting to improve theirs. And sometimes we got to swallow a little bit of discomfort to allow for progress to be made. And sometimes we're good at that. And sometimes we're not. And so it's a much harder question for me as a rabbi than I would like it to be, because it should be that I'm going back to Reverend Deacon's response earlier about equality and equity. And I'm reminded of the tall, medium, and short person all trying to look over a fence together, and there are 3 boxes available to them. Equality says they each get 1 box, but that doesn't solve the shorter person's problem, and it doesn't help the person who can already see over the fence because he's tall enough. True equity in that case means sharing them unequally for the moment so that everybody can achieve the end goal. And eventually we can work to redistribute later and make sure everybody can equally achieve the goal without needing to be helped or ignored at a given point.
Thank you. And we really appreciate, your thoughts, everybody's, their thoughts. And I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Tameeka.
Thank you, Jessica. I will share the comment that is in the Q&A. It's not a question, it's really just a suggestion by one of the attendees. So thank you, Ms. Fleming, for sharing it. It says, I would encourage this wonderful group to consider supporting legislation introduced by Representative Jazz Lewis on fair youth sentencing, which would eliminate life sentences without parole for crimes committed as minors. And then she gives the legislation number, MDHB 409. So thank you for sharing that with us. All right, so we're going to turn to poll number 4 and looking for your thoughts on this. So we asked earlier about what you do in your church. So now it's how often do you participate in social justice causes through organizations other than your mosque, synagogue, or church? So outside of your faith communities, how often do you participate in social justice causes? Is it all the time, sometimes, not often, or never? All right, so I think folks have had enough time to respond. So let's see what the answers are. All right, so it's about the same as it was for inside your faith community. So either you're doing it inside, and I'm hoping that it's some sort of inverse relationship, that either you're doing it inside your faith communities or outside. But it looks like we're all doing something, so that's great to hear. And then we have our final poll, if we can bring that up, and looking at what the next topic will be for our Bowie Speaks series. We have a few other topics we're considering, so we'd like to hear from you about what you would like to see next. And so there's the role of social and civic organizations in the quest for social justice, impact of social determinants, how to heal and move forward, or how to become an ally. So I think folks have had enough time to respond to that poll. So let's see what the next topic will be. All right, so it looks like how to heal and move forward is the next topic. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, either through the Q&A or through the poll. I'll turn it back over to Lori.
Thank you so kindly. I really appreciate all of the comments and questions that we receive from our residents. This is a dialogue, so it's important that we give you all the opportunity to ask the questions that you want to hear the answers to as well. What I'm going to do very quickly is give each panelist about 30 seconds to a minute to give their closing remarks. And let's go ahead and start with Reverend.
Thank you, Lori. I would just like to say thank you to everybody who made this a part of your evening. It is so important to turn our minds and our hearts towards how we can take care of the people in our communities and beyond who are marginalized, are oppressed, are in need of justice. And so the fact that you took an hour out of your night tonight to learn more about what religious communities could do, and that many of you have been with us every time that we have presented something. I just appreciate you all so much, and know that we are building such a beautiful community here in Bowie that that I think will be an example for many communities in the rest of the country. So thank you for being here.
Great. We'll go ahead to Mr. Khalil Shadid.
I think the wonderful thing that I have just learned through this community interaction is that justice is not only a principle for the church. It is a principle for every segment of our society. There is injustice in education. There's injustice in police department. There's injustice in our judicial system. There's injustice in how people are receiving their food. If you happen to be like me, a Muslim going to public schools, you understand what that means. But I can say that we need to stand on justice regardless of where we find ourselves, and never allow injustice to persist.
And Rabbi Weisman.
Thank you. Basically, I think to Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who had the privilege of walking with Dr. King so many miles in the search for social justice, and referred to those walks and those marches as praying with our feet. I'm grateful to Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who was saved from being the chief rabbi of Berlin in the beginning of the Hitler regime and brought to this country, who spoke in 1963 before Dr. King and reminded us that the greatest sin is not hate, it's silence. So I echo Reverend Holladay's words to those who put this together, to those who are here, to those who are walking with us, and allowing us to walk with them, to teach and to learn from you, to get to know each other, and one step at a time to put Dr. King's words into action. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. So please continue to be the light, continue to be the love.
Thank you so much. Final thoughts for you, Reverend Deacon.
I'd like to thank my fellow panelists, thank the committee for putting this together, and I'd like to thank everyone who came out and who will watch this later recorded. It's very important that we all come together, discuss these important topics, and learn and grow from them. When I think of social justice, I think back to when I first graduated seminary. People found out I was a pastor, and all the crazy emails I would receive, all the forwards, I see Emily smiling. She's received the same things. And I remember receiving one that was particularly anti-Islamic. And it was talk about those people, and it ended with, for those people, religion isn't just religion, it's a way of life. And I was horrified. Not that for our Muslim brothers and sisters that their religion is a way of life, but for this person, Christianity or their faith wasn't a way of life. And I think for us, our faith needs to be a way of life. It needs to pervade every aspect of our life, including social justice. So often in the church, we hear don't get political, but I think what they mean is don't get partisan. We should be political. The first statement of Christian faith is confessing Jesus as Lord, which in itself is a political statement, because the opposite of that is it's saying that Caesar is not. I love that Reverend Holladay referenced Micah 6:8. That is one of my favorite passages to go to But I also like to go to Matthew 25 when Jesus separates the sheep from the goats. And to the sheep, he said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you gave me clothes. I was sick and in prison and you visited me. And the sheep said, when did we do this, Lord? He said, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And so as faith leaders and as people of faith, when we come together, we need to care for each other. We need to work for each other. We need to lift each other up and make sure we all have equal opportunities. We need to speak out on important issues, remembering that silence gives aid to the oppressor. We need to come together to better our community and our society.
Excellent. Thank you for your words, Reverend. Well, I would definitely like to thank all of our panelists, Reverend Deacon, Reverend Holladay, Mr. Khalil Shadid, and Rabbi Weisman. Thank you so much for your words and for educating us on the role of your religious organization in the quest for social justice. I'd also like to thank our moderators, Jessica, Bonaventure, Joseph, and Tameeka, for working very hard to put together this series for the community. And I would like to encourage you to use this conversation this evening as a springboard for conversations around your dinner table with your friends, family, and your community to continue to see what can we do to make social justice work for all of us. On behalf of the city of Bowie, I thank you, and we will have more information about our third series for the Bowie Speaks Community Conversation. Thank you again, and good evening.